I'm Mavis Biss. I'm from the philosophy department, and I'm the director of the Center for the Humanities at Loyola. I'd like to thank our program coordinator, Bess Garrett. I might extend that thanks again for all of her work organizing today's event, although she did have to scamper away to take care of one more detail. Thank you also to Events and Catering for helping put everything together so we can celebrate. People who study the humanities have a reputation for being deep. I think that the faculty and students whose work we are here to celebrate today have really earned that reputation. As the philosopher Melissa Zinkin writes, deep thinking, quote, captivates us, holds our attention, and inspires in us a feeling of wonder and respect. On Zinkin's view, deep thinking has a distinct feeling. It is the feeling of our humanity. We're here to be captivated and inspired by the thinking of some of the most accomplished faculty and students at Loyola. I'm going to begin the program today with the Teaching Faculty Excellence Award. This award recognizes outstanding achievement by a member of the teaching faculty in one of the humanities departments. I'm delighted to present this year's award to Dr. Erin Palmore of the Classics Department. In his 6 years at Loyola, Dr. Palmore has become indispensable to the Classics Department. He's taught a staggering 13 different courses, including all 4 levels of introductory and intermediate Latin, and all 3 levels of introductory and intermediate Greek. Dr. Palmore's teaching has impressive breadth, but his creativity in the classroom is even more impressive. Dr. Palmore brings the study of classics to life through collaborative learning, creative assignments, and engagement with diverse sources. His students play interactive learning games, write their own hymn to a Greek god, and consider contemporary Black artists' responses to classical texts. The Center for the Humanities Steering Committee congratulates Dr. Palmore on his exemplary approach to inclusive pedagogy and his impactful mentoring of student research. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Palmore. We turn next to our student research fellows, our humanity interns, and the digital humanities fellows. We're going to hear from each student, and in the reception after the program, we invite you to come and learn more at each of the poster stations that are set up around the room. I'm going to begin with the student summer research fellows, and my own student from my Kant seminar, Yasi Ayala, is our first presenter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yasi, and my project is called Echoes with the Pulse. This eco-poetry chapbook explores extinction through voices of lost species, from the T-Rex to the dire wolf, blending research, imagination, and environmental grief with room for wonder, hope, and curiosity. Each poem was born from my experience working as a summer nature camp counselor. My campers' curiosity, awe, and heartbreak at learning a creature like the dodo once existed but doesn't anymore. Those moments have stuck with me. I used works from Mary Oliver, Amy Nezukumatato, and Elizabeth J. Coleman to create poems that would inspire the future generation. Their works, their themes, words, and messages made me realize the importance of my work and how deeply we still long for connection with the natural world. My love for nature has grown into a passion for environmental storytelling. Extinction isn't just science, it's felt. I hope to open a world for writers and future generations to feel the importance of saving nature. What stories do we need to tell so future children don't just learn about extinction, but understand how to stop it? I also have physical chapbooks that I will be handing out and a QR code attached to the poster for people who want to read my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasi. We'll hear next from Caitlin Cottrill.
Hello, my name's Caitlin, and this summer I worked on a research project titled Passing Glances, examining historical queer identity in Nella Larsen's passing. My project centers around a queer reading of Nella Larsen's 1929 novel, Passing. The novel explores the friendship between two women, Claire and Irene, as they grapple with their racial identities, tangible lives, and rocky friendship. Scholarship surrounding Passing has addressed the homoerotics of Claire and Irene's relationship. However, much of this scholarship surrounds defining the relationship and searching for evidence of queerness in their bond. My project ventures to explore specific queer facets of Claire and Irene's love. I analyze the language used to describe them, as well as a history of historical queer relationality between women to identify common historical queer dynamics between Claire and Irene. Stemming from the historical context of the Victorian romantic friendship and the turn-of-the-century mindset shift around friendships between women, I identify a budding butch-femme dynamic between Claire and Irene. This relationship mirrors the women's relationships to their racial identities. As each woman grapples with their ability to pass as white, they subtextually question their ability to live in a world designed around domestic partnerships between men and women. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'll invite up next Fisk Kandau.
Hi, I'm Fisk. For my research, I read books published from 1996 until just February of this year and examined how cannibalism was used as a way to explore interpersonal relationships. Specifically, I know it's weird. Specifically, I found that cannibalism was portrayed as an act of love, with things like loneliness and fear of abandonment driving the protagonist to want to keep the people they love with them forever. This is probably really different than what you usually think of when you think of cannibalism, with things like psychopaths and the dehumanization of colonized people taking up the popular psyche on the topic. But these books all highlighted the emotion and sanctification of the act. I was originally introduced to this topic through TikToks, where books like A Certain Hunger, where a woman kills and eats 4 of her lovers, got super, super popular for some reason. So if you want to learn more about cannibalism and how it's related to love, I'll be at my poster. Thank you.
Fisk, how could we possibly not want to learn more? We'll hear next from Liam Holden.
Good afternoon. My name is Liam Holden. And this summer, I had the opportunity to conduct independent research on author Ursula K. Le Guin's 2013 short story, The Daughter of Odrin. My work built on prior research that I had undertaken for a course here at Loyola that was called The Idea of Male and Female in Greece and Rome in the spring of 2024, and I had then presented that research at Johns Hopkins Undergraduate Research Symposium just last March. I had argued with the mere 5 pages and 10 minutes I was allotted that Le Guin was inspired to write The Daughter of Odrin as a reinterpretation of Euripides' 5th century Athenian play, Electra. I made the case, furthermore, that her reinterpretation placed a special emphasis on gender issues. Considering the complete absence of The Daughter of Odrin in Le Guin scholarship up to this point, that all proved a rather tall order. To truly do the subject justice, it demanded more time, care, mentorship, and resources, all of which the Center's research grant provided. I was able, over the last few months, to read and to reread and to reread the relevant texts, everything from 2,500-year-old plays to ebook exclusive short stories. I've been able to articulate a more systematic argument for Le Guin's reliance on Euripides, a more thoughtful reflection on what she wants her narrative to communicate about gender and patriarchy, and a clearer look at the connections between her work here and the politics of her broader corpus. My thanks to Dr. Martha Taylor for advising me on this grant. Dr. Taylor's insight and criticism were invaluable, truly, to this work. My thanks as well to the Center for the Humanities for this opportunity and for believing in the academic merit of scholarship that is, frankly, as I'll be happy to tell you more about at my poster after our presentations, about wizards and dragons. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. If anyone would be more comfortable sitting, there are some seats in the front. No pressure, but if you would like to sit, you may. I'll welcome up to the podium next Cameron Langlois.
Hello, hello everyone. My name is Cameron, and my summer project is called Self-Commodification, Capitalism, and Alienation of the Self. My research seeks to address the philosophical problem of self-commodification, the act of turning one's own identity and likeness into a commodity. When an individual self-commodifies, they seek to align their identity with the market, resulting in a flattened existence dictated by the whims of that market. This phenomena also calls into question the existence of a fashion victim, an individual who aligns themselves with the market and participates in all the trends, yet still manages to fall victim to the fashion. They fail to grasp that cool factor. In order to identify the ethical implications of this problem, we must recognize that it is ultimately a problem of authentic identity, the metaphysics and language of belonging, and the constitution of self. In order to thoroughly explore this problem, I introduce 3 key principles: authenticity, curation, and ambiguity. I then suggest that Charles Taylor was correct in his assessment of the current understanding of authenticity, but that his understanding is ultimately too rigid. I then bring in Simone de Beauvoir's concept of ambiguity to suggest an explanation of this problem, as well as illustrate the ethical boundaries of self-commodification. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. We'll hear next from Mulai Njai.
Good afternoon. The United States of America has the largest number of unfree people in the entire world, prisoners. The US has higher recidivism and incarceration rates than any other country, and this doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. The incarcerated are part of an invisible class that we try very hard not to notice, which is necessary to consider this nation one centered on liberty and equality. Even though we ignore them, the imprisoned person has held much importance to the development of American identity long before the American Revolution, and it continues to this day. Through a study of colonial captivity narratives, antebellum and slave narratives, and prison narratives detailing the creation of the modern carceral state, my research reimagines American history through these stories, exploring how American exceptionalism has been shaped by the exception. Our ideas of liberty have been challenged by those deprived of it, and continue to do so as we seek to form a more perfect union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mulai. Let us hear next from Alora Paul Martin.
Hello, my name is Alora, and over the summer I researched the relationship between language, sexual violence, and power in The Handmaid's Tale and Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood and The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. These speculative fiction novels all take place in dystopian, patriarchal worlds where language is deeply intertwined with the subjugation of female bodies. In my paper, I tracked the characterization of male and female characters within the novels, focusing on the narratives that they create in response to their situations. I explored how the male characters use language to gain and maintain power, and how language is used to control and exploit the female characters. I then focused on how the women in these novels attempt to resist a complete loss of autonomy through storytelling, and how their voices outlast their bodies but have no true impact on their societies. Narratives have a great deal of potential power within these stories, but the women are incapable of making any true change within their oppressive societies. These dismal depictions of helpless futures at once distance readers from their own reality, but also force us to confront the rape culture that we are all entangled in, and reconsider whose stories we are listening to.
Thank you, Alora. May I invite Stephanie Pascal to the podium?
Sorry.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Piskel, and this summer I had the opportunity to combine my academic interest in youth subcultures and my personal love of music in my project Make Some Noise, World Building Across the Underground. Music is often deeply entangled in social movements and led and populated by young people, becoming the center of their newfound communities. It serves as a vessel through which they express their personal beliefs beyond what governmental authority and cultural norms project. My goal was to find how young people engaged in the world-building project in the face of extreme political circumstances. To do this, I took unofficial rock music from the USSR in the 1970s and 80s, anti-apartheid freedom songs from South Africa in the 1980s and 90s, and underground rock Zir Zamini from Iran in the early 2000s, and I placed them in conversation with one another. The themes, language, and sonic qualities of this music reveals an attempt to self-determinate and world build against extreme oppression. When we listen to this music, we hear the voice of generations willing to rise to the occasion and are reminded to tune into the songs that are around us. My thanks to the Center for Humanities for this opportunity and Dr. Ko for support in this process.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll hear next from Melissa Raymond.
Hello. Over the summer, I have taken the opportunity to do a close reading of Clarice Lispector's canon to better understand the space that the divine and mysticism take up in her works. The phrase, the matter of the it, is a pervasive idea repeated in many of her books that allow for Lispector and the reader to investigate the root of the thing and what definition comes from being able to individuate every living thing by its essence. For Lispector, the greatest divine force of all can be found between God and man, a relationship which in many of her works she levels so that the protagonists are able to be in conversation with God instead of distance from him. After studying her work, I wrote a short story inspired by her manipulation of narrative form and emotional intensity, which are some of the craft functions she uses to generate religious feeling outside of referencing God directly. They are also the things that originally pulled me towards her work. Lispector showed me how the power that comes from creating is the reason to create it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Eva Retford is going to round out our group of student summer research fellows.
Hi, I'm Eva Redford. My project this summer was about Ovid's Metamorphoses. No, not the Metamorphosis. I didn't write about a man bug or a bug man or whatever. The Metamorphoses is an epic poem from ancient Rome which includes myths you probably know, like Orpheus and Eurydice and Icarus. But what I focused on was how Ovid uses myth to challenge Emperor Augustus's control of art and artists in Rome, since Augustus had been silencing and punishing artists for their art, a fate that eventually caught up with Ovid, as only months after he finished the Metamorphoses, Augustus exiled him from Rome. Nevertheless, the myths that Ovid chose to include in the Metamorphoses function like case studies, inviting Augustus to see himself in the mythological figures, encouraging him to rethink how he treats artistry. Ovid's approach is suggestive, like a math teacher telling you that you should probably take another look at that answer. Ovid didn't spell out answers, but encouraged Augustus to be a more discerning viewer of art and a better artist himself, someone who sees art not simply as propaganda, but as something transformative. While ultimately it didn't help Ovid much, the lesson he teaches, even if we're not emperors, is just as, if not more pertinent, for us to learn today. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. The center supported 3 students who did summer internships in the humanities this past summer. We'll hear first from Ari Acevedo.
Good afternoon. My name is Ari Acevedo, and I had the privilege of receiving a stipend for a summer internship from the Center for Humanities. I interned at Girls Life magazine, a magazine dedicated to informing, inspiring, and entertaining girls around the globe. There, I presented articles and quizzes at weekly pitch meetings, and we had the opportunity to write about anything and everything that interests us. At GL, the more niche, the better. My personal favorite topic to write about was DIY and upcycling. Alongside that, I also had the opportunity to work on the print issue, where one of my ideas was used in the October-November issue as shown there. Without the Center for Humanities, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to enjoy this internship over the summer without having to worry about how I would support myself financially. And currently I work or volunteer as a web editor and oversee the fall interns as well. It was an amazing experience that helped me become a more engaging writer and ultimately becoming a better advocate for myself, saying yes to every opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ari. We'll hear next from Evelyn Donovan.
Hi, my name is Evelyn Donovan, and over the summer I had the amazing privilege of interning under State Representative Bridget Plouffe at the Massachusetts House of Representatives. As an intern in the legislature, I had several duties, including constituent services, attending hearings and briefings, conducting legislative research. I also attended the speaker series, which was put on for us by the program, in which we had several state representatives and other elected officials come to talk to us, as well as the governor and lieutenant governors of the state of Massachusetts. The most important thing that I learned from this experience was how vital constituents are to the state government. Because state legislatures tend to have smaller districts than their federal counterparts, they have closer and more personal relationships with their constituents. I spent a lot of time writing letters of recommendation, answering emails and phone calls, and writing letters to constituents, and also meeting with them and hearing their concerns. Overall, this broadened the ideas of what I wanted to do with my degree, deepened my interest in policy and public affairs, and I would highly recommend anybody who is interested in government to look into interning or doing some kind of volunteer work with their state legislature. Thank you.
Our third intern, Alex Preußer, is abroad, having the time of his life, but he did send us a message so that we can learn about the two internships that he completed simultaneously this past summer.
Hello. Hello, my name is Alex Preußer, and I am a sophomore comparative cultures and literary studies major, and I have minors in Spanish and writing. And unfortunately, I won't be able to join all of you today in person because I'm currently abroad in Madrid, Spain, for the semester, but I would love to tell you all about my summer. So I completed 2 internships simultaneously. The first of the 2 was with the St. Louis Poetry Center, where I coordinated and planned poetry readings and workshops. And it was my job to research each of the local and regional poets that we featured, and then prepare social media posts introducing each. And this work was centered mostly during the day, and then I spent my evenings with a local bookstore called Novel Neighbor, working with author signing events. I also supported their nonprofit organization Noble Neighbor, which promotes children's literacy outreach in public schools and juvenile detention centers in St. Louis. And through all of this work, I was really able to connect with a larger community of readers and writers in the St. Louis area, as well as published authors and poets that were doing their tours around the country and doing readings in St. Louis. Balancing and integrating my work with each organization was extremely rewarding and informative, and I'm really excited to keep building on the skills and knowledge that I gained this summer in my future career and pursuing all of my goals. But thank you all for coming to this event and supporting both me and all of the other presenters. And yeah, have a great day.
Alex does have a poster on display, so you can get a look at that during the reception. We have a special group of students who is going to present as a group, well, with a spokesperson, next on the program. This is the Digital Humanities Fellows. They attended as a group the Digital Humanities Summer Institute in Montreal for a week this past summer, and they're going to give us their report back.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Blanche, and I represent the Digital Humanities Summer Institute cohort. Like Dr. Biss mentioned, it is a week-long convention at the University of Montreal, and where people can learn more about digital humanities. What is that? For those unfamiliar, digital humanities are how we preserve documents and other texts online using technology and online platforms. In our current digital age, it is essential to know how the digital humanities can be accessed in ways that preserve works for future generations. At DHSI, our cohort took a variety of classes in project management, creating digital editions of hard copy texts, running code in with our own data, and even making our own podcasts. These unique courses intersect fields such as computer science alongside humanities fields, which is not currently offered at Loyola, allowing us to explore new perspectives on preserving historical information. We learned skills such as project organization, using coding languages such as JavaScript and XML, organizational setups such as TEI that will serve us beyond the classroom in terms of how websites are arranged, as well as in personal projects and in professional careers such as database management and library science. And with this new information, we now know how to make the humanities documents and information accessible to anyone with internet access. As the only group of undergraduates at the conference, it was a pleasure to understand how other scholars use the digital humanities to present their information with a wide variety of ways, such as mapping relationships between Black individuals in colonial Mexico City to generating tones for medieval musical manuscripts. Anything is possible in the age of the internet, and DHSI gave us the tools to broaden our knowledge and share our information with a wider audience. Thank you to the Center for Humanities for funding every aspect of this trip, ranging from our meals, our housing, our course registration, and our flights. Thank you.
I'd like to ask all of the Digital Humanities Fellows to stand. You heard from Katie Blanche, and also in the group is Abigail Gaughan, Stephen Guy, Anthony Loya, and Connor Lynch. We are recruiting the next group of Digital Humanities Fellows. The applications for the next cohort are due at the end of October. We have Toja Oko from the History Department and Yu Stearns from Modern Languages and Literatures who will be the faculty leaders of that cohort. And we will invite you to check out the Digital Humanities Summer Fellows table that will be populated by the last cohort of fellows if you'd like to learn more and think about applying for the next cohort. I'd also like to just mention before we move to the next part of the program that the center also has a category of grant that supports students to attend conferences and present research. Some of the students who have presented today might be interested in pursuing this newfound skill of public speaking further at the Maxey Symposium at Hopkins in March, for example. So I just want to put it out there. We'd love for more students to take advantage of this opportunity, students who, and not only students who presented today, but any student who is interested in attending a conference and presenting research. This group of students that you just heard of, I really think of you as the pride of Loyola. Thank you so much for coming here and getting up and sharing your knowledge. We'll have an opportunity to learn more from the students at the reception. But it's now time for me to present the Nakbar Award. This year's Nakbar Award will be presented to Ramon Espejo Saavedra from Modern Languages and Literatures Department. The Nakbar Award is named in honor of a beloved philosopher, Bernard Nachbar, and it recognizes outstanding achievement in scholarship or creative work by a faculty member in the humanities. We are celebrating Ramon Espejo Saavedra for his years of service and research all the way back to 1997 when he joined the faculty. He has published 2 monographs and 19 essays on topics in Castilian Spanish literature during this period. His first book, El reto de la novela histórica, narrativa y poder en Galdós, Valle Inclán y Max Aub, The Challenge of the Historical Novel, Narrative and Power in Galdós, Valle Inclán and Max Aub, examines historical fiction during the 19th and 20th centuries in Spain. One reviewer called it required reading for those interested in the genre. Dr. Espejo Saavedra's second book, Autenticidad y Artificio, Authenticity and Artifice, explores the genre of the narrative essay, or costumbrismo. Both books broke new ground in a discipline that has traditionally privileged poetry and the novel. Dr. Espejo Saavedra's students benefit from his scholarly expertise in courses like Spanish fiction of fantasy, mystery, and terror, and realism and naturalism in Spain. I could say much, much more about Dr. Espejo Saavedra's teaching and service at Loyola, but I don't wish to delay the start of his address on the life of the mind. So I welcomed Dr. Espejo Saavedra to come and offer us his thoughts on the life of the mind in his address, What Are You Reading? Literatures as Engagement with the World.
All right. Thank you.
We're just looking for who's advancing the slides. Is there a
Will this
clicker
do it?
here?
Okay. All right. Perfect. Okay, I'd like to begin by thanking the Center for the Humanities, the Nachbar Committee, and my colleagues in both the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures, as well as in many other departments around campus. We've worked together for many years, and it's an honor to receive this award from my peers. So what are you reading? For people who enjoy reading, and especially reading literature, it's the inevitable question. We want to know what other people like to read in order to discover new writers, new works, new genres. More than that, we want to compare our own reactions to the books we read with those of other people as a way of finding out more about who they are as well as who we ourselves are in the process of becoming. For me, that's the key to the truly social nature both of writing and reading. In comparison to the other arts, such as music, theater, or film, which can and should be enjoyed as part of an audience with all the immediacy of seeing your own experience reflected in that of others, reading involves an initial experience of solitude, of separating yourself from other obligations in order to concentrate on the words that are in front of you. That, however, is only the beginning of a process that is, at every step, defined by dialogue. First, we recreate through reading the world that the writer has given us, a process that's never passive, but rather involves constant assessment, qualification, and comparison between the author's interests, prejudices, and blind spots, and our own. From there, our interest expands to other works by the same author, to other authors of the same period, to his or her relation to our own time, and fundamentally to the reactions of other readers, past and present. The simplest of questions, what are you reading, implies both a curiosity about others and a constant examination of our own place in the world. This approach to the relationship between readers and writers has been the basis of most of what I've written. In particular, I've constantly been interested in the way different genres of fiction have evolved during the modern period. With the expansion and acceleration of the publishing industry over the course of the last 2 centuries, many specific subgenres of fiction have appeared, some of which are still with us today and help to organize the shelves of every bookstore, while others have slowly disappeared as the interest of the reading public shifted. The idea of a literary genre as a set of narrative techniques developed to express the interests shared by readers and writers in a particular period led me first to the historical novel. The genre was popularized throughout Europe at the beginning of the 19th century to explore and express the growing understanding of national identity as the result of tension between opposing social and political forces. The historical novel in its modern form appeared in Spain in the 1830s, just as the absolutism of King Ferdinand VII was giving way to constitutional monarchy that would characterize Spanish politics for the rest of the century. If you can go to the next slide. My first book, The Challenge of the Historical Novel, Narrative and Power in Galdós, Valle-Inclán, and Maxaub, is a study of the way that three modern authors adapted the historical novel to describe key political conflicts of their time, using the literary techniques and narrative strategies of the realist, modernist, and avant-garde movements. I focused on the way that the language of political commitment and conflict often obscures the complexity of human interaction on an individual level and blinds us to the consequences of imposing ideological conformity on ourselves and others. One clear example is the novelist Max Aub, exiled in Mexico after the Spanish Civil War, whose series of novels, The Magic Labyrinth, became a lifelong project to memorialize and understand that conflict. In my chapter on this author, I examined, among other topics, the concept of treason in wartime and the many opportunities for misuse and even self-deception that it provided. For most of my career, however, I've been studying the development of short fiction in the 19th and 20th centuries. What drew me to the short story is that it's notoriously difficult to pin down. Although short narrative genres have existed throughout the history of literature, the short story in its modern form has always had a somewhat ambiguous status, at times held up as one of the most important or artistic forms of fiction for its ability to condense experience in a way similar to a poem, at others condemned as a mere training ground for novelists. The uncertain status of the short story for readers and writers is bound up with the relationship that the genre has had with the publishing industry over the last 2 centuries. Beginning in the 19th century and down to the present day, short fiction has found an outlet in newspapers and magazines, creating an immediate relationship between readers and writers, while at times giving the impression that it's an ephemeral or minor art. Nevertheless, this ambiguous or relatively marginal status has allowed short story writers to experiment with the genre, even in periods when more prestigious or popular genres, such as the novel, seem to coalesce around particular schools, movements, or aesthetic ideals. In its classic form in the mid to late 19th century, this combination of formal and stylistic freedom with constant attention to the social and political preoccupations of contemporary readers makes short fiction particularly interesting. My first attempts to study the evolution of the genre developed naturally from my previous work. While doing background research on my first book, I reread what is generally considered the most important historical novel in Spain during the Romantic period, El Señor de Bembibre, by Enrique Gil y Carrasco. There we go. Inspired in part by the medieval novels of Walter Scott, such as Ivanhoe, Gil y Carrasco combines a dramatization of the history of the Templars in the 14th century Spain with lyrical descriptions of his own region, León, to create a wholly original work in which the personal relationships between the main characters are more central than the recreation of historical context. I noticed that the fame and influence of this one novel had overshadowed his highly original contributions to one of the most popular genres of the period, the artículo de costumbres, the short narrative sketch or narrative essay. Driven by rapid urbanization and the expansion of the reading public, the sketch became popular in the middle years of the 19th century and constituted a proving ground for writers in many different countries. In Spain, the relaxation of censorship laws following the death of King Ferdinand VII in 1833 led to a proliferation of newspapers, especially in Madrid and Barcelona, that represented an opportunity for the young writers of the time to reach an ever larger audience. The genre quickly evolved to accommodate widely different views on some of the topics that most concerned their readers: the expansion of cities due to the migration of workers from the countryside, the influence of foreign ideas, fashion, and customs on national traditions, and the continually evolving nature of the city itself. Depending on the ideological inclinations of each author, the attitude towards these changes ranged from a sharply satirical criticism of the superficial middle-class culture of the time to a nostalgic and sometimes sentimental description of traditional customs that were being lost in the rush to modernize. Much of what had been written on the genre focused on its historical importance, either in terms of the development of descriptive techniques, that would later influence the great realist novelists of the second half of the century, or as an important precursor to modern literary and political journalism. In the short sketches by Gili Carrasco, however, the author takes advantage of narrative structures and techniques of other literary genres that were already familiar to the readers of the time to shape their attitudes towards particular social groups. One clear example was the article El Segador, and there's the illustration from it, in which he describes the situation of field workers from Galicia in northwestern Spain who made the annual trip on foot from their home region to Castile and Extremadura in search of work. To appreciate the context of Gili Carrasco's portrayal of these workers, it's important to understand that for many readers in Madrid and elsewhere, the Gallego, or Galician peasant, was a figure of fun, mocked for his backward customs, his pronunciation of Castilian Spanish, and his general ignorance of the modern world. The Galician mozo de cuerda, so called because they carried a rope with them that they used to haul heavy goods for anyone who would hire them, was a common sight on the streets of the big city. In this sketch, Gili Carrasco strikes a difficult balance in order to restore a measure of dignity to the segadores. On the one hand, his careful and sober descriptions of their clothing, speech, and customs demonstrate the respect that he hopes to communicate to his readers for a segment of the population almost universally marginalized. At the same time, he frames the yearly round-trip journey in search of work in terms of an epic quest, familiar to any reader of the historical romances of Walter Scott. Without attributing any unrealistic virtues or capabilities to them, Gili Carrasco portrays these poor migrant workers as engaged in a struggle for survival that is every bit as heroic as the noble knights that figure so prominently in the popular literature of the time. He neither condemns them as backward nor gives in to nostalgia for a supposedly more traditional or authentic way of life. He helps his readers to understand the real difficulties that many people faced in trying to accommodate themselves to the social and economic demands of the society that was coming into existence. The article that I wrote on the shorter works of Gili Carrasco formed the basis for a chapter in the book I eventually published on some of the most prominent authors of the genre, Authenticity and Artifice in Spanish Costumbrismo. By the middle years of the 19th century, the popularity and influence of the narrative essay or sketch had begun to fade, and both readers and writers came to see the realist novel as a far more complex and panoramic way to address the evolution of contemporary society. Many of the technical problems of shorter narrative forms, such as how to select, arrange, and condense the material, or how to choose the appropriate point of view for each situation or topic, continued to be explored in the short story, which came to prominence in the last 2 decades of the century, during the second great expansion of periodical literature. For many authors at that time, the longer novel that dominated publishing had become stagnant, while newspapers, journals, and magazines provided a way to address the immediate concerns of their readers without limiting notions of what form their ideas had to take. Editors looking for ways to attract the broadest possible readership typically dedicated a section of each issue to original works of fiction, either serialized novels or increasingly toward the end of the century, short fiction. Instead of providing the panoramic social analysis and extended psychological portraits of the realist novel, the short story evolved into a highly experimental genre, with authors drawing on diverse literary techniques and traditions to provide a brief flash of insight into the most pressing social and political concerns of the moment. Over the last several years, I've spent most of my time studying the great short story writers of the period, such as Pedro Antonio de Alarcón, Leopoldo Alas Clarín, and Emilia Pardo Bazán. For me, the interest of the late 19th century short story lies in the way it actively engaged with early manifestations of many issues that define modern society down to the present day. I've studied, among other topics, the treatment of military veterans by society at large in stories by 3 authors with very different ideological commitments, the repression of sexuality and the representation of what were considered monstrous bodies in a short story by Leopoldo Alas, and most recently, the relationship between violence and the rhetoric of masculinity in the stories of Emilia Pardo Bazán. Pardo Bazán is a key figure of 19th century Spanish literature. In addition to being the author of one of the most important novels of her time, The House of Ulloa, she was an essayist, polemicist, and publishing entrepreneur who devoted an increasingly large part of her time and influence to the promotion of equality between the sexes. In the last decade of the century, while she continued to publish novels, she turned to the short story as a more immediate and direct way to address readers, and eventually published over 600 stories before her death in 1921. My recent work on the short stories of Pardo Bazán has focused on the convergence of her interest in crime fiction, an increasingly popular genre at the time, and her attempt to draw attention to the problem of violence against women. Many of her most famous stories center on the ways in which men of all social classes used violence or the threat of violence to maintain traditional hierarchies of power between men and women. At the same time, in many essays, newspaper articles, and public talks that she gave over the last 25 years of her life, she exposed how contemporary legislation regarding both crime and education reinforced the attitudes behind these crimes. Always attentive to the latest developments in literature both at home and abroad, Pardo Bazán closely followed the growing fascination on the part of the reading public with stories of detection and true crime. When it came to fiction, however, she was unimpressed by the most popular examples of the genre. In 2 review articles on the Sherlock Holmes stories, for example, she criticized the emphasis on investigative technique and a lack of the psychological depth that she thought was necessary to truly explore the basis for most criminal acts. In a particular subset of stories that Pardo Bazán wrote at the turn of the century, she uses the structure of the suspense or crime story to explore the relationship between contemporary notions of masculinity and the threat of violence not towards women, but between men. In the period immediately before and after the Spanish-American War of 1898, political rhetoric in Spain, as in other European countries of the time, returned constantly to the problem of decadence and a lost ideal of virility. Analyses of international relations appeared, dividing countries into those that were more or less masculine, stronger or weaker, and many of the remedies proposed centers on recovering a certain fighting spirit among the men of the governing classes. In stories such as In the Sleeping Car, Pardo Bazán builds tension using techniques popularized by the crime fiction of the time to crystallize these anxieties and present the psychological study of a man whose identity is so bound up with the need for physical domination of other men that when he's unable to control his fear of a stranger during a train trip, he loses his sense of self. As in the case of El Segador by Gili Carrasco, Pardo Bazán adapts and modifies a literary form that was already popular with many readers of her time to draw attention to a particular social situation. In the process, she changes the way that her readers perceive not only the world around them, but also the capacity of literature to engage with and affect it. My main interest has been in 19th century literature, but I've always tended to let myself be guided from one topic to another by the books I read, the research I do, and the classes I teach. One book leads to the next, one author to the next. Research is an intellectual discipline, but reading literature is fundamentally a form of exploration. Every time you open a book, you're opening yourself up to a very particular way of seeing and understanding the world, and you have no idea how that experience will affect you. In this sense, reading is an act of absolute freedom. You can be guided in your reading, you can learn to appreciate works that you think are confusing or difficult, but while you're reading, no one is in control of your reactions, your opinions, or your thoughts about the book. Once you finish, however, the natural thing to do is to try to communicate what you've read, to share it with others, and to find out together what it means for you. The process of articulating your ideas completes the experience and clarifies its impact on you. This way of looking at reading and writing about literature has clarified for me certain ideas I've always had about what we do together at a university. The first is that beyond basic common sense notions about the education of children, no form of censorship is acceptable. If reading is an act of exploration, of absolute freedom, then we should be allowed to read and explore any text, any topic, to find out what it means for us. The university provides the time, the space, and above all, the freedom to consider and evaluate ideas and perspectives on the world without fear of retribution, in an atmosphere of mutual respect and tolerance. The important corollary to this is that the university provides a place where people have the liberty to follow their interests in their chosen field of research. Many of the most important and revolutionary ideas in every field have come from what can generally be called basic research. People following their noses and seeing where an idea or topic leads them. Any pressure, whether political, social, ideological, or market-based, is simply a distraction from this fundamental function. For these reasons, it's important that we defend and preserve the independence of our universities at a time when they're constantly being criticized and misrepresented as either schools for indoctrination or simply irrelevant to the rest of society. Universities are unique in valuing the freedom to think, evaluate, and explore. That is worth preserving. Beyond the university, there's still the act of reading literature. Once you pick up the habit, it's very difficult to stop, simply because it's a way to understand the world that is at the same time focused on the experiences of others and temporarily isolated from any other form of influence. We read according to our own preferences, but the habit of reading literature accustoms us to adopt an attitude of attention, curiosity, and critical evaluation that is the basis for active engagement in the world around us. The Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges, famous for doing little else over the course of his lifetime but read and write, was once asked by a journalist if he regretted not having lived more. With characteristic calm, he answered simply, "Reading is a way of living." We don't need to go to the extremes of Borges to understand what he meant. The entire world is right in front of you. All you have to do is open a book. Thank you.
If you're not inspired yet, it's not our fault. I so much appreciate the message of Dr. Espejo Saavedra's address. If you've become an accomplished scholar, if you're a student who spent the summer doing research, you've spent a lot of time by yourself, probably in the library or hunched over a book or hunched over your notes. So now it's time for us to commune and come together. Thank you so much to all of you for making today's Celebrate the Humanities event so full of energy. Please visit our students' posters and learn more from them. Thank you also to the mentors who worked with each of the students who presented research today. And on behalf of the center, it is time to continue celebrating.